Hi everybody, this is Warren Herman, and today we're going to speak about an interesting subject about how we integrate knowledge. The problem is, most of the time, knowledge becomes rationalistic, and therefore we lose touch with reality. Reality, I believe, is given to us in two ways. Like, we can understand reality, we can talk about this as left-brained and right-brained. And the thing is, you could say we could understand things holistically, symbolically, artistically, or as a whole with our left brain, with our right brain. And with our left brain, we could say that we understand things analytically and kind of going into the details. And this is very much symbolized in the two types of knowledge, the two types of knowledge that we can gain and that our first parents were offered in the garden. That they were given this kind of, this option of having the tree of life or the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the tree of rationality, so to speak, and wisdom, and the tree of, of life and love and those type of things. So the thing that we really have to remember is that, these two things, for better or worse, are now part of our lives. And in a way, redemption, the story of redemption, is always about how do we, we see in the Easter hymn, he has trampled down death by death. There is always a use of the thing that seems to be in opposition for the purposes of God, because nothing can really oppose God and nothing can really get off track because he's kind of he's outside of time. You can't really frustrate the designs of someone who's governing everything. That doesn't work. So even when you go off track, he kind of redirects the track. So it just doesn't work that way. And so what we're going to talk about today is a way, we can see in all areas in which rationality takes over, knowledge becomes impossible. You have to unite reason and faith. You could say faith purifies reason and reason purifies faith. We could, of course, put observation and experience in there as the next level, because this is what St. Paul teaches us in the Bible, is that we have these three levels of our experience, which he uses the word nous, psyche, and sarx, which are sometimes translated as spirit, soul, and flesh. These three levels, we could say that our experience purifies our reason, and our reason purifies our experience. And we could say that our reason purifies our faith, and our faith purifies our reason. And this can give us a way of engaging with reality that can be very helpful. It helps us understand how we know things and how we understand things. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, whenever we go through something, like, so for example, let's say we go through a crisis of faith. Let's make this very simple. Let's take this, because obviously I'm speaking in a Catholic context, but let's make this very simple. Let's say, let's not even go into let's just say you're going to a parish, and let's just say let's just say you thought, okay, you're listening to the priest, and let's just say this imaginary priest just quits being a priest because he says, I just don't believe this anymore. And you say, wow, if a priest doesn't believe it, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't either. But, it could just be something like that, like losing faith. Sometimes the people do things that we lose faith, it disrupts our faith. Or we find a piece of data that we don't understand how we can reconcile it with our understanding of reality. We say, okay, it's just like something like, okay, well, let's just say the church teaches something you didn't know the church taught us. So they say, well, maybe my whole world is disrupted. The thing is, sometimes we have a lot of trouble, maybe, I hear something in the news. Oh, maybe the church is not really the true church. So, the problem is that in these situations, we're not using a unified way of engaging with knowledge. When we find a contradiction, so for example, St. Augustine teaches us that when we find a contradiction, apparent contradiction in Scripture, we want to not say, okay, either there's something wrong with my manuscript that I'm looking at, either there's something, or maybe ultimately it comes down to there's not something wrong, God's not doing something wrong, the scriptures don't have something wrong in them. It's that obviously my understanding of this is not correct. And the thing is, the great irony is that we don't realize that all of reality is a revelation of God. And we start to think, again, like in a kind of fallen mindset, that we can kind of use our mind to just find things without revelation. Because there are things about reality that we can't really even know. And the thing is, really, when we get into using our reason to engage with reality alone and unaided by faith, we actually can't know anything. You actually develop into a monistic collapse of all knowledge, and then all knowledge becomes superfluous. So, for example, if we look at, I'm going to pick up a leaf here. So, for example, this is a leaf. So where's the leaf? Like, if I just kind of break up this, if I pull off this piece, is it still a leaf? I mean, like, what if I take off this piece? Is it still a leaf? Eventually you kind of break it down and there's no leaf. Analysis and breaking things down, you can't find the leaf in the leaf. You can't find, and this is the insight really of Buddhism, is that you can't find any self in anything. Well, you can't, because the thing is, through analysis, through mindfulness, through the analytical methods available to humans, you get down to nothingness. And that's why Buddhism talks about shunyata. And why in Buddhism, the origin of reality is kind of like, if we look at these woods here, you could say, okay, everything, the sun is interacting with the trees, is interacting with this, is interacting with that, the sky is in the tree, is in the cloud, is in the this, is in the that, and everything only exists in relation to everything else, and nothing really exists in itself. And that's the best you get at when you try to have this non-created world. And it eventually dissolves into actually being philosophically incoherent, because there is no cloud in the tree, there is no air, there's no interplay among non-existent entities. So the problem is, you end up in this really strange, it sounds very poetic. They talk about, okay, yes, the interconnectedness of all life, but there isn't life. Life doesn't exist, there's nothing. There is no soul, there is nothing, you kind of can see through everything. The only way that you actually end up with, I think the only way that you actually end up with any reality is if we kind of say that God is saying something through everything. It's kind of like, I think that reality is kind of like a written word. Because the thing is, if you look at a word, let's say you look at the word house. There is a little house over here, but let's just say, let's say the word tree. If you look at T, R, and E, is there any tree in any of those things? I mean, I know that the T looks kind of like a tree, but that's beside the point. But is there a tree in any of those letters? No. Speech becomes incoherent once you start to look at the parts. But the thing is, speech is understood in a common language. Common language is the thing. So if you start to understand text, if we start to understand reality as text, then we start to understand natural revelation. And the thing is, we also understand that we can't comprehend natural revelation only through the right brain. We only through the left brain. We have to understand that we can only perceive revelation through. We have to have two eyes. That's why we have two eyes. To kind of triangulate what something is, because you can't you have to have your right eye and your left eye in order to actually see where something is in space. But the thing is, what happens if you only have one eye? What happens? Everything becomes kind of flat. Everything becomes kind of flat. But what we want is a world that's 3D. And for a real 3D world, there is this necessity. And I would assume, though, that there's probably some way in which one of our eyes is probably dominant. And, this is someone who knows about eyes would probably be able to tell me this answer. But the thing is, we have to have this ability to kind of see reality with both of these eyes, because we can't look at reality just as kind of mere symbols, and because we know that we know in a way that the leaf, is not just, we could rip up the leaf, so we have to understand, the leaf is made up of these parts. We can know more about the leaf by analyzing it. But we also lose the leaf by cutting it up. So the thing is, you have to know it as a whole, and holistically and analytically. But the problem is that we have to subalternate the category of analytical knowledge to the categories of holistic knowledge. So this is what Jesus, I believe, speaks about when he says, we must be as wise as serpents and as pure as doves, because we have to have that sight of the heart, that the love of God must be the core of who we are, and then we must also not be dopey. So the thing is, for example, someone who just has a pure heart is kind of conceived as like naive, and someone who's shrewd is seen as someone who, they may not be naive, but they're kind of jaded. They're not like, but the thing is, what we want to be is we want to have both of those things. We want to have the best of both worlds. And that's why Jesus says, be as wise as serpents and as pure as doves. It's very interesting that, these phases, like this kind of like we see in the progression of human life, these phases from creation, these analogies to creation, fall, and redemption. We see that the child begins in this world where everything seems kind of like, okay, everything seems kind of ideal in an ideal world. Everything seems perfect. My parents seem perfect. My family's perfect. And then you go to teenage years, that's the fall, where the kid says, oh, wow, everything's horrible. My family's the worst. I won't want to be around them. And then we go toward maturity, where we say, okay, my family was not the best, my family was not the worst, but yet we respect our family because we want to subalternate the holistic understanding that I should respect my parents to the reality, which is okay. And I made another silly video about, just a dopey example of, okay, somebody's dad is an axe murderer. Okay, you say, okay, I respect my dad, but I don't invite him out to do axe throwing. It's like, so it's like there's this way of subalternating one to the other. And I want to give it, because we're in a natural setting, I want to kind of give an example of this in our world, because the thing is that it's very hard, because when we look at the brokenness of the world or the complexity of a forest, it becomes very hard to understand how all the parts fit together. This is true in any theory. So whenever you have a theory of reality, for example, let's say like an understanding of the cosmos and the universe, there's always things that are not understood, like dark matter, black holes, energy, and all these different things. But there's always a sense in which people put their faith in the ultimate premise of the theory, and then the details kind of like go by the wayside, or the details kind of migrate all over the place. You see this in theories of cosmic evolution and biological evolution, because although the kind of paradigm remains intact, the goalposts kind of move when we're playing the game, because it's like there's a way in which the different evidences, even if different evidences may fall, there's a way in which that paradigm stays intact, because there's ultimately a faith that there's no other way that it could be. And that's really what happens in the paradigms of cosmic and biological evolution, is that there's a deep faith that matter is able to organize itself because there's no God, matter must be able to organize itself progressively into higher levels of complexity. And it becomes self-evident, and it seems self-evident because since there is no divine intervention in creation, it seems that this must be the way that it is in that worldview. The problem is, though, that the thing really here is that worldview is obviously in harmony with the fall. We're using only reason, only analysis, rather than revelation, receipt, the holistic understanding that we see through the scriptures, which give us the eyes to see the world through the symbol system that truly is being spoken to us, the true language of God that is being spoken to us through things and through objects, because we cannot know the tree except as tree, as spoken to us. Even the individual tree is being spoken to us. It is like a word on the page. If you break it apart, you don't see any more meaning. Just like if I chop up the word tree, E doesn't mean anything, R doesn't mean anything, T doesn't mean anything. It's because God is speaking tree to us. And so the thing is that we have to understand this understanding of creation has to be understood as a real, viable, and the only actual philosophical paradigm through which the world can be known, giving us both of our eyes so that we can actually understand holistically and analytically, eating from both the tree of knowledge and good and evil in the right order. And this happens, we see this, this kind of redemption of things. It's not like I'm not making this up as like a weird idea that we want to you did the tree in the wrong way. It's like Solomon prays for wisdom. Wisdom is not a bad thing, but wisdom needs to be subordinate to the higher level of the nous. Like we have to have order in our personality, as St. Paul teaches. Those levels have to be in order. We can't have the flesh dominate the mind or dominate the spirit, dominate the nous. Like the nous must rule the psyche, must rule the flesh. So the thing is, the real problem here is that, but the thing is that these are rightly ordered and harmonious, because see, the thing is, what we really like, on one level, our flesh wants, wants to, let's just say, like, wants all the bad stuff. Our flesh wants to do bad things in the wrong way. That's what it wants to do, and a lot of times we use our reason to get out of the language of the noetic knowledge of God. We use reason, say, okay, that noetic knowledge is just an illusion. I'm not going to interpret reality noetically. I'm just going to use my psyche, my reason, and I'm going to get out of that knowledge, and then I'm going to do what I want. The other thing is, though, but what we really want, but we don't get what we want. What we really want is to live forever. What we really want is things that endure. We don't really want these things. So the real way, only real way to get what our flesh really wants, which is eternal life, is to actually have, all these things rightly ordered. It's not that we say, let's kill off all that's good in the body. It's just, no, we throw out the bathwater, but we keep the baby. It's like we want our deepest longings get fulfilled when we have everything rightly ordered. And I want to give an example of this type of thing. And this example may make me seem like a fool, but I want you to really think about the philosophical implications of how knowledge itself collapses. So for example, just like, if I use a Buddhist perspective, an experiential consciousness perspective on reality, if I use that and I look at objects, I eventually start to see through them. I start to gain no meaning, and I start to see that there is no meaning, that everything is one thing. I start to have these Buddhist and Hindu insights that that all reality is consciousness, and the only thing is consciousness knowing consciousness, and the consciousness has no content. There's nothing to know because everything is just nothing. So it's like that's what happens when you use experience and consciousness without revelation, because you kind of lose knowledge of everything. And everything collapses into one thing. The same thing happens when we use reason and apply it to something. So for example, I was reading about the study of scripture through the documentary hypothesis. And they were talking about how, I think the Bible, this part of the Bible may be from this document, and this is another document that may have been brought into the text. And so therefore the text is really just a collection of hundreds of different documents that have been squished together randomly. And so when you use something like this, eventually everyone's arguing, and the field degenerates into nobody knowing anything about the text. And there was even one thing they were saying humorously that then became, from the documentary hypothesis, they humorously called it the fragmentary hypothesis, because eventually it became this thing where it was like, and that's kind of more of a modern movement in biblical scholarship, but there's no way to gain any knowledge because everyone's just their own authority saying, I think that this many documents went into it, I think this, I think that, I think this document is this age, I think it's that age. It just becomes this kind of broken thing where everyone's just reasoning, but reasoning is getting to no certainty, because the place where certainty comes from is through faith purifying reason and reason purifying faith. It's not fideism where it's like, I only just believe and I don't have reason, and it's not rationalism where it's like, I just reason and don't have any faith. So it's like neither can really get to any knowledge, just like you can't really get really good aim at anything with only one eye. So Pope St. John Paul II talked about these as wings, as the two wings of the soul, you know what I'm saying? So the thing is, what I'm going to say here is going to be controversial, but I believe it's a perfect example of this. It's an example of this necessary subalternation of reason to the noetic, to the holistic, of the right brain to the left brain, so to speak. Of the left brain to the right brain, so to speak. So this is what's necessary if we are to perceive reality correctly. And so, it's like, because we don't want to see we don't want to not be able to see, we don't want to be able to only see the forest and not the trees. We don't want to be unable to see the forest for the trees, but we want to be able to look clearly and see the trees and see the forest, and understand that the trees are part of the forest, and how does that work, and that the forest is superior to the trees, and one tree having a problem doesn't mean it's not a forest. It's like we want to see it all in the right order. And one of the real interesting ways that this happens, is when we try to look at revelation of creation and the revelation about creation of the world in Genesis, and this is kind of something that always brings fear to us, because people say, oh wow, how could it be that the earth was made in 6 days? How could it be that there was an Adam and Eve? And there's a deep unease about how do we reconcile our scientific paradigms, because it's such a 100-pound elephant in the room of our scientific paradigms that integrate all these types of knowledge about, okay, cosmological evolution, the geological column, oh yeah, this is what the Jurassic period was like. We have all this like stuff in our heads, and then and then we have a fear of like, okay, well wait, all the things that matter to me might not be true if I can't reconcile these things. And maybe it's not true. Maybe there's no love for me. Maybe there's no purpose in life. Maybe there's no Jesus. Maybe there's no nothing. And so we really get attached to the ways in which we say, oh yeah, evolution's fine. We get really attached to these perspectives. So the thing is, to threaten something like theistic evolution is to threaten people's understanding of everything. That's the deepest threat you can make, I think, to the modern psyche of a Christian, is to threaten the idea of theistic evolution. Because that's the thing that holds the whole world together, because we have this deeply evolutionary paradigm of our world. And if we challenge cosmological and theistic evolution, then what happens is we're really hitting everything. We're really giving a gut punch to this modern synthesis of the mind of the Christian. And so it's hitting everything. It's hitting the way they're holding everything together. And so that's really it's kind of like someone's holding the whole world together with a bunch of like ropes and stuff, and you're kind of like hitting right at that. And that's why people really get attacked when they talk about these ideas, because they are deeply controversial and go right into the roots of our psyche and our understanding of reality itself. These are earth-shaking ideas, quite literally. And so the thing is, what I want to talk about, though, is in this as an illustration of the concept of this video. The thing is, and I think, there's a lot more complexity to this, but I think that in a broad brush, this is what's going on. So, for example, I think that, and there's a lot of stuff you could study on this subject. This is one of the areas I prefer to study, and for better or worse, is an area that I keep digging in. But the thing is, if we think about it like this, a kind of creationism that says, okay, I'm not going to look at science is not good. A kind of thing that say, okay, I believe in the Bible, I don't believe in that science. Okay, that's bad. But I don't know really if people do that. I mean, I'm sure there are people who do that, but I think that people do that less than people think. So yeah, we have to look at all the data. We have to be analytical. We have to be like that. We have to be open to all discoveries and all different things. We don't want to say, we don't want to say anything weird like, okay, the fossils were made by the devil. These would be weird thoughts. We have to understand those kind of things. We have to understand the world in a way that makes sense. But we also then go into this rationalism. We're like, okay, well, obviously, there's evolution, there's all that stuff, so there's no Adam and Eve. And people, I think, underestimate the evolutionary narrative's power to challenge Christianity. People think the narrative of cosmological, even the Big Bang, people underestimate how challenging cosmological and biological evolution, molecules to man evolution, are to the whole system. So the problem is, what I want to say finally is that the way you don't want to make a synthesis at the end. So that the middle would be, okay, it's just like a kind of a fideistic creationism. Then there's a rationalistic evolutionism. But we don't want to do. The synthesis is not subalternate the Bible to science. The synthesis is subalternate science to revelation in the Bible. And the thing is, so science has to submit to scripture and tradition rather than scripture and tradition submitting to science. And so the proper synthesis, for example, of that kind of knowledge, so that we can understand what we are three-dimensionally in the world with both eyes, is to say, hey, it's not theistic evolution, even whether of the cosmos or molecules to man, because theistic evolution is subalternating God to a theory, to a certain understanding, a certain paradigm, a certain way of making sense of the world that doesn't maybe make sense of the whole picture. Because there's a lot of stuff, you can make a whole lot of sense out of the world through evolutionary paradigms. You can use that as a principle of or you can organize a lot of information around that. But we have to take that whole synthesis and reorganize all the parts of it, reorganize all the molecules in that whole substance of evolution so that it goes into something else. And then you get what we would call creation science. So this is stuff that, this is, I believe, the real understanding of how you would deal with reality, because you have to subalternate all of philosophy has to submit to religion, which has to submit, the sciences have to submit to philosophy, which has to submit to religion. You can't have, and that's the same thing as the fall. We can't have the rational over the spiritual. We have to have the same order, the same polity, the nous, the psyche, the sarx. We have to have right order in ourselves, right order in our knowledge, in our thing. And we have to use that paradigm in order to understand all things. And so this is the paradigm that we want to understand, this subalternating paradigm, through which we reorganize anything that, like St. Paul says, that sets any knowledge, that do not be led astray by the elemental forces of the world. Take captive